Welcome to Dragonian, your podcast for news and updates in Hong Kong and Taiwan. I'm your host, William. Hi everyone, welcome to the episode 16 of the Dragonian podcast. This is your host, William. This week's episode will be about how confusion have shaped this week's events in Hong Kong and Taiwan, from anti-competitive practices in Hong Kong to a quite chaotic development of the longest-staying story within this podcast till now, Taiwan's election. This region is riddled with interesting stories and confusing decisions. If you would like to learn more about Hong Kong and Taiwan, please subscribe to the podcast. We will deliver news stories and very interesting events that happened last week to your favorite podcast app every Tuesday. Subscribe now. So now back to events that happened in Hong Kong first. In this part of the episode, or in Hong Kong's part, we will be discussing very confusing events that happened in Hong Kong last week, from anti-competitive practices to a prosecution or a persecution to the government's response to the district council election. It seems that Hong Kong is quite confusing for everyone to understand what happened. So first is about anti-competitive practices in the housing market in Hong Kong. Major leading housing agencies were prosecuted by the Competition Commission in Hong Kong for anti-competitive practices, where they request at least 2% of their commission for all new flats sold through them. In Hong Kong, most housing agencies will offer remuneration to customers when they purchase new flats through these various different housing agencies. These practices will help so-called to stabilize the market, as technically in the contract it was written in a high amount. However, this practice has also harmed the housing agent industry, where the profits of these realty agencies were deeply harmed, as they would need to use at least half of their income to pay to customers to use them. As a result, various housing agencies have recorded losses during the pandemic years. As a result, there were discussions about setting up an industry baseline for commissions. Midland Realty, the Hong Kong Housing Services Agency, Centerline, and Ricker Corp got into an agreement last year for charging to request at least 2% real commission for all new flats sold through them, as for them to deal with the issue of dwindling profits. However, this was considered an anti-competitive practice by a lot of people, and this news story where all of these realty agencies announced the same policy, the Competition Commission opened a file to investigate if there are any wrongdoings for these practices. In the investigation process, Centerline and Ricker Corp, two of the major leading housing agencies, cooperated with the Competition Commission to provide details about their wrongdoings and reach an exemption agreement in exchange for the collaboration. They were being exempt from the case being brought to court. This is actually a very confusing story. It is a very confusing thing for the general public to know if the Competition Commission will charge people or not charge people, not only because if they have done any anti-competitive practices, but also if they are willing to be a whistleblower to review this case. Being an early whistleblower got an unintended practice to keep any profits that they gained from these anti-competitive practices. It is also very confusing that Centerline and Rickercorp got a complete exemption from paying the cost or fines for doing anti-competitive practices just because they report to the authorities first. In fact, they've already kept the profit or extra money that they earn through these anti-competitive processes. However, no fines were brought against them just because they cooperated. Normally, in these cases, they would need to at least pay a fine similar or equivalent to the amount of money or amount of extra money they got through these anti-competitive practices. It seems that this is not the case for the Hong Kong people or for the Hong Kong's housing industry. It is actually quite confusing as a result. Just before ending this story, this is a question for you to bring for your own thought. Are there any possible solutions to attract people to whistleblow while not harming the idea of this anti-competitive thing? As in the current state, basically, people are encouraged to both carry out these anti-competitive practice and report as a whistleblower. This probably needs some discussion, I would say. Next, the next story is about prosecution on the 7/21 Yuen Long attacks against Lam Cheuk Ting and others. So, after the landmark 7/21 Yuen Long attacks case or the rioting case brought against white-clad protesters, a case was brought against Lam Cheuk Ting, a then Legislative Council member, for allegedly rioting in Yuen Long Station. So Lam is charged with others with rioting with very dubious rationale. And this problematic thing actually further worsened when people really got into the story and got into the discussion. The hearing have been riddled with various irregularities from the start. For example, prosecutor invited eyewitnesses were identified as a supporter for the white-clad and at the same time appeared in Yuen Long Station at the time with the white-clad rioters. When being asked by defenders, the judge told the eyewitness not to answer questions presented by the defendants just because that may constitute a prosecution against you for participation in rioting, possibly a reference to the white-clad cases, where they basically self-identify themselves participating in a riot. Furthermore, other witnesses have also revealed very dubious police preparation of the events. For example, an active anti-riot squad was present nearby in Yuen Long, but did not respond to events that happened within the station, where basically police only appeared after so-called 39 minutes after the first call for help. Furthermore, plainclothes police officer were also actually present in the station at the whole time from 6 p.m. at the 7:21 attacks, where the attack only started at 10. However, they did not respond to the white-clad attacks, while the station manager also had no opportunity or had no real method for them to escalate the issue through internal channels so as to deal with the so-called escalation by right-clad protesters, or here black-clad protesters, where there are actually none. When basically everyone's eyes were in Yunlong, were in Shanghai, not Yunlong at that time, for the China government's office in Hong Kong, for protests and riots, or their so-called riots in Shanghai at that location. So it brought a lot of questions brought into discussion. First, why didn't police not deploy nearby forces that are already on standby and having enough gear at the same time? I don't have any concrete answers on that, but various eyewitnesses, when being asked by the defendants, have basically proven that there are extra anti-riot squad members on standby, while basically clapping hands with the white-clad people in some films or in some cases. That's a question. The second very confusing thing is, why will the judge tell eyewitnesses not to answer questions just because they are charged or the answers could lead them to being charged in another case? Are they a victim, or are these eyewitnesses a victim of these events? Or they are just people who got lucky because they support the government, so they won't get charged for any rioting cases that they do for supporting the government? For the general public, the question is more complex. Why Lam is charged in the first case? This had been a very interesting question. Basically, Lam had been in contact with police for everything that happened in and after the 7:21 attacks. Lam was physically injured, and basically there are no evidence or no direct evidence showing that he was in a riot scene, apart from him being an apparent victim and his futile tries or his futile attempts to stabilize the situation. There are just none. The question that brought to the audience or brought to you is, where is justice in Hong Kong? We have heard quite a lot of court cases in Hong Kong last week that were reported in the various previous episodes about how Hong Kong's judiciary are currently working. Possibly, that's why so many people have left Hong Kong. But I have no concrete answer on that. And that may be an answer, that may be a question for another day. The final part of this Hong Kong part of this episode is about government's push to boost voter turnout rates. After 2020, voter turnout have basically dropped to 30%, 25%, and dropping even lower by any election that involved the public to vote, as the Hong Kong government removed a large portion of the democratic elements within the district council and the legislative council, where for the former, which they're having an election in December, were technically considered a near full democracy, as there are near zero limit on both who can got into the seats, on how these seats are elected, and the method for counting votes, or where basically it's a technical universal suffrage. However, after the so-called district council election reform, basically all these democratic elements got shrunk to a very tiny bit. This actually in fact turned down the will of the people to vote in the elections. For example, in 2021, the voter turnout actually dropped 15 to 17% when compared to the district council elections in 2019, where traditionally it would be much lower than those in the so-called legislative council elections. So, to boost the voter turnout, the government pushes various plans, including some that were technically unconstitutional. For example, they have opened border voting stations to let people vote. While normally, or in legal sense, people can only vote in their assigned voting stations. Furthermore, various pro-establishment organizations, in collaboration with various parties, also used lucky draws, various shorts, videos, etc., to boost voter turnout rates by just telling people to vote, to so-called build a better community. The government also stepped up attempts to encourage people to vote by encouraging public servants or civil servants to record videos encouraging people to vote. And normally this was only done by the Home Affairs Office, this was actually done by the Home Affairs Department. This is actually done across departments, just with one message: go out and vote on that particular day, or 10th of December. However, the Hong Kong government also said that they had no targets on voting or on voter turnout. In fact, they had already brought out rationales for low voter turnout, where they consider the idea of not voting as a confidence vote for the government's work. So you can see how the government is so interesting, where they technically tell people to get out and vote, while at the same time saying that we don't have any targets. Possibly quite interesting. Normally, turnout rate was an indication on how people consider or how much the people support the current system. And reinterpreting low turnout rates as a confidence to the government is the most interesting and confusing thing for people to think of. Furthermore, this also directly contradicts to attempts by the government to push people out to vote. And also, it is also a possibility for them to just to cover up the real reason for why people don't vote. Because Hong Kong, although never a democracy, now is just an authoritarian regime, where basically everything were just not democratically elected or so-called filtered out, as basically all these reforms just stating that reducing the democratic elements while adding up political security by adding various filters. And in this case, was the filter on who can nominate. And basically, possibly, or just a possible solution, or just a possible explanation, is that they have intentionally omitted the possibility that people don't go out and vote because they are utterly disappointed with the new patriot-centric system where people just cannot voice out freely. The end question for this news or this topic or this event is, do the Hong Kong government hear the people sing? So this is all about top stories and top confusing events that happened in Hong Kong last week. There are also other events that happened within the city. Some are less confusing, but because of time constraints, this is all about, or these are the top stories that happened in Hong Kong last week. So now, back to the part about Taiwan. In this part of the episode, we will be discussing very confusing political developments in the island, while also highlighting so-called shining a light after years of confusion in various attempts to boost the island's defense industry. First off, this will be about the presidential elections in 2024. Last week's developments were huge, while at the same time very confusing. The opposition's integration plan fell apart. The Pan Greens, the currently ruling government, got their running peer. While at the same time, there are also very interesting updates on independent candidates. So, quick update on the integration of the opposition, or not quick, I would say. The two largest opposition parties, the Chinese Kuomintang and the Taiwan People's Party, reached an agreement last week, in Wednesday or Thursday, on how to integrate to form a common ticket. TPP's presidential candidate decided to give a green light for the integration poll, while at the same time, just to let Ho win if there are any statistical errors, or if the difference in support are just not that significant in statistics. So they did an opinion poll on integration each side, plus former president's foundation, Ma Ying-jeou Foundation. So they will choose one first. They will choose one expert on carry out these polls for each side, and then they will choose 3 companies. Basically they will choose over 9 polls that took place on the 11th of November till 17th of November, where there will be 9 sets of polls in total. After that, they will do a calculation on basically the support, on the net support, and etc. And winner for each poll gets 1 point. And if there are no apparent winner, for example, the difference in support in different tickets fell within statistical range, then Ho will get a point. Then the person with a higher point will just lead for the joint presidential bid, while the loser will be running as the running mate for the vice presidency. There are also some discussions about how various how the government or the jointly elected government will work, including roles and responsibilities, etc. However, after the results got out, because of the discussions, 3 polls were excluded from this whole discussion, and then within the 6% poll, the idea of statistical importance got into the spotlight, with basically Cole saying that I assume that this error will be approximately 1.5 plus and minus, which means that a 3% range, while Kuomintang uses the statistical range for approximately 2%, that will be 4 to 6% for each poll, a bit different for each poll. As a result, the discussion basically fell apart, with Cole announcing that he will just go and represent the Taiwan People's Party and continue his election or his bid to the end, or in Chinese, 坚持到底. And after some updates this week, and in this week, Kuomintang's internal documents have revealed that Ho will present his vice president's running mate in Wednesday and in tomorrow morning, or in tomorrow morning Taiwan time, as a signal that this whole thing is just falling apart. For the Pen Greens, William Lai there are already rumors or near confirmation for him to announce his running mate as Xiao Bikim, or Xiao Meiqin, the Taiwanese representative to the United States. Actually, this discussion happened for quite a long time, as Xiao was considered as the ideal candidate for maintaining the close partnership between Taiwan and the United States, while at the same time it also technically angers China, as they consider Xiao as a 台独顽固分子, or basically it means a diehard supporter for Taiwanese independence. So yes, the Pen Greens got quite interesting. They finally got a vice president candidate, and they are also, in this week's some just quick update, they are also the first set of candidates who run in a party ticket got registered. Yeah. And then is the independent candidate stories. This is way more interesting, I would say. So Terry Goh was confirmed as the only running independent candidate after counting nominee votes. Terry Goh actually got 800 to 900, approximately 900,000 valid nomination votes or nomination tickets. And he is also named as the second highest nominated independent candidate since James Song Chuyu's nomination at the presidential election in 2000. A bit fun news, I would say, after Terry is that there is also another set of independent candidates yielding more than the legally required 285,000 nomination forms or valid nomination forms. They submitted over that amount of forms, but in fact only 2 were valid. Where are the others? They are basically photocopies of the 2 nomination forms. So yes, this is the reality of this whole thing, or this very confusing set of candidates doing a very confusing thing for just literally no reason. So a bit leading candidates for running for election for presidency. So William Lai runs for the DPP while announcing Boko Xiao, Bikim Xiao as vice president, Ho Youyi for the Chinese Kuomintang, Ko Wen-je for the Taiwan People's Party, and Terry Gou as an independent candidate. So it's actually very confusing, and this is just another episode on the confusing conflicts or the confusing politics of Taiwan. It's already the 5th or the 6th episode where we are talking about the integration of the opposition. First is Terry with Kuo-Wen with the Chinese Kuomintang, then is the Chinese Kuomintang with the TPP, and now every single plan fell apart. We start chasing this news, we start reporting on this, but this basically took quite a lot of time for us to prepare, and this week's update with just too many, I would say. As normally there will be a legislative UN's update, while it will be next story, I would say. And there are also confusion on two things. The first thing is about integration. Are they integrating? Is the largest headline story that everyone is asking. It's just basically someone is just using a very common Taiwan sandals, basically a white sandal, a blue sandal with white stripes as a cover, to basically, I would say, make jokes on this whole thing. Furthermore, there are confusion on the actual goal and the stated goal. Both parties say that they run for removing the incumbent Democratic Progressive Party from power. However, everyone knows that running in the joint ticket means that basically the ruling party will just win. And the confusion here is that, are they just planning for opposition, for just being in opposition? Because being in opposition actually, in some cases, in a democratic society, means a better relative position than in power, as they are technically, they won't be responsible for any policies or any failure of policies announced by the government, while the ruling parties, they get the power, they also get the responsibility, and also they also get the extra cost for them to rule the island or to rule the state, to bring the state forward, to push the state forward daily in some cases. It's confusion. It's confusing. And the question to the audience is very simple. Just when will this whole chaos end? No one knows when. And possibly we may need to discuss, or possibly we will just need to get through this week to have the final answer, as the deadline for registering presidential candidates ends this Thursday or Friday. I'll just end this week. The second update is singled out legislative yuan's elections. So parties are now starting to announce party lists after announcing their candidates for various constituencies. So the highlight or the spotlight of this week's news or these announcements are both both the ruling party's list and the largest opposition party's list. So first we'll discuss about the opposition party's list. For Chinese Kuomintang's list, they consider themselves as best of the best list, were actually riddled with influence from local factions and even recalled and rejected politicians. So in Taiwan's election law and election rules, basically both parties are guaranteed a set amount of seats so as to bring in the original design case, bring technical people into the legislative yuan or the legislative council or this building, so as to improve basically make voices from various people, from technical people, from professionals, from elites, etc., let their voice get into the legislative yuan. However, in Kuomintang's list, it gets very interesting. Han Kuo-yu, also known as, better known as the presidential candidate for the 2020 presidential elections, and being subsequently recalled as Kaohsiung City's mayor in 2021 due to his alleged negligence on Kaohsiung after getting the post as a mayor, topped Kuomintang's party list. In fact, he actually, the recall votes that he got are actually quite higher than the votes that pushed him to be a mayor. While when he elected as a mayor, he got 890,000 votes, while when being recalled, he actually got 930,000 votes supporting this recall. Second in the party list is actually lost in last year's Kaohsiung mayoral election. And at the same time, within the safe seat line for seats, approximately 12 seats, basically it included connections with the Yunlin's Chang party, and also people who were not well known to the public apart from their identities as direct descendants of Kuomintang politicians. So this Kuomintang's list is riddled, or in some cases being mocked by people outside of the Kuomintang as the punished citizens list, or in Chinese, 惩罚市民党. So, commentary later, but now get back to the list. At the same time, the Democratic Progressive Party also announced their own list. Although it did not spare a lot of confusion within the general public, traditional Democratic Progressive Party supporters, some said that they actually feel betrayed, as doctors, nurses, and people in the medical industry felt betrayed, as this party list did not place any medical workers or medical worker turned politicians into the party's list safe seat list, or in this case, it's approximately 12 people. There are, for the oppositions, also some accusations that this list is an uneven seat split for the various factions that are within the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. There are also some smaller parties announcing their own set of candidates. However, it is notable that one of the larger small parties, the Taiwan People's Party, led by Ko, did not announce a list until now. In fact, they just basically placed it possible. The announcement was postponed for a possibility for them having not decided to nominate a vice president for election or just nominate one. As a result, there are just no lists for the Taiwan People's Party announced. However, a well-known former legislative yuan member for the New Power Party, Huang Kuo-chang, K.C. Huang, quit his original party, New Power Party, where they also yielded party list candidates and constituency candidates, and joined the Taiwan People's Party in support of a rotation or in the removal of the Democratic Progressive Party. So it's very confusing for both the legislative yuan and the presidential elections. For the presidential elections, the confusion is more about integration. But in a legislative yuan, we are seeing defects. we're seeing or are we just seeing a real-life party that punishes citizens, literally pushing candidates with low overall support into safe seats just to punish them or just to secure their voter base? That's the question. Furthermore, it also seems that nomination for members for the Legislative Yuan may also be affected by the presidential election. There are discussions on the Legislative Yuan, and all these discussions seem very interesting. And here, I would say both Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party and the Democratic Progressive Party are having basically a different identity or a very different vision for how Taiwan will grow, will become a regional power in the next couple of tens of years. Furthermore, in the Kuomintang's list, a lot of people are labeled as so-called warlord against corruption or the best warlord against the Democratic Progressive Party, etc. It's confusing as they are basically they hope to control the Legislative Yuan to push out their own policies, etc. But this whole thing just failed. Or in this case, for the Chinese Kuomintang, they seem to be building their own party identity from hate instead of their ability to rule Taiwan. For the Taiwan People's Party, the main reason for them to the founding of the party is to end the blue-green split within Taiwan. However, they seem to have joined the blues just to topple greens. Interesting. Taiwan People's Party were considered as a centric party, but it seemed that in this case, they just are not centric at all, in the best case. So these are the two stories, or these are the main stories that happened in Taiwan. The second story is about, the last story is about the Indigenous Light Frigate. So after the Indigenous Submarine Program, IDS, the Indigenous Light Frigate Program also kickstarted. This is considered as another leaping stone for the building up of an indigenous defense industry in Taiwan. In fact, the plans of having an indigenous light frigate being designed locally and produced locally started, or the idea actually appeared as early 2000s. However, it's only after 20 years that this plan was realized as a concrete plan to cater the growing threats from China. It was postponed by various reasons. While in 2000s, there was actually the Chinese Kuomintang who basically stopped any budgets for this program. While in the 2010s, it was just basically a warming China-Taiwan relations. And just only now, after the pandemic, that they have time, have the effort, and have the ability and determination and shining a spotlight on the confusing Taiwan's, on the very confused indigenous defense industry in Taiwan. And as a result, it seems that this is possibly finally a tear moment for Taiwan's local defense industry. For connection with this week's theme's confusion, the question is very simple. Why did Taiwan take so much time just to initiate the process when facing a neighbor that felt so unified by all means, including through force? Furthermore, who are blocking the attempts for Taiwan to defend itself? And are these political parties actually working in the long-term interest of their voters, especially the Chinese Kuomintang, I would say? Last piece of story is about the APEC summit. As this is a story that actually spanned across Hong Kong and Taiwan, this is considered the last part of this whole episode. Updates from the APEC summit. So first, John Lee, although claimed to have been invited by the organizers, did not attend the summit, while at the same time just heading out to various events within Hong Kong, stating to justify him, saying that he is very busy to attend local events. It's weird, as basically these are not very important events when compared to a very large summit where he can actually meet presidency or in this case, the head of the Communist Party or head of the ruler of China Sea. It seems very weird, I would say. For Taiwan, the discussion on this whole the APEC summit was actually represented by the founder of TSMC, as discussed in previous episode, and discussions are all about the economic cooperation within various member states or various member countries or constituencies of the APEC economic cooperatives. Furthermore, China and US also came out and basically after the APEC summit and discussed regional events or world events for as an astonishing 4 hours. In here, it included very interesting things. First, they have discussed about Taiwan, US they have discussed Hong Kong. They also discussed a war in Russia and the Gaza strike, and basically the US-China relations, the defense in China, about a possible war in 2026 and 2027, and etc. Why not include Thai in this discussion? It's confusing, as Taiwan is basically one of the main stories, and Thai is technically, she is technically free if she is invited, but not in this case, I would say. So yeah, so this is the end, or these are all the stories, all the topics that will be covered in this episode. We hope you find this episode very informative. If you do, please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any single episode. If you have any feedback, please let us know in the comments or drop us an email at william@dragonianpod.com. Thanks again for listening to episode 16 of the Dragonian podcast. We will be back next week with more news from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Have a safe, prosperous, and happy week ahead. Goodbye.